All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. We've got a good number of people here in the room, so I figure we can go ahead and get started. And we got a good hour of content here for you guys. So first off, I want to say welcome to everyone for our webinar today on licensing Windows Server 2016 in a virtual environment. My name is Andy Serwich from Altera Software, and I'm joined today with Thomas Maurer. How you doing, Thomas?
Hi, I'm good. How are you, Andy?
Good, good. So licensing is always kind of an interesting topic, right? Whenever I start talking about licensing, I always like to mention, I know a guy that works with licensing a lot, and the answer to just about every question is always it depends, right? So that's just the nature of licensing, and what our goal with today's webinar is to kind of teach everyone about what's new in licensing with Windows Server 2016, talk about some new caveats, some new rules that are in place, and give you a general sense of moving forward with licensing in the 2016 server era. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with some what our agenda is for the day. So first off, we're going to be doing some introductions. I'm going to introduce myself, Thomas, and Altera, the sponsor, and then we're going to get into the licensing presentation. Thomas has a great presentation talking about all the new stuff in licensing and some things to watch out for. Additionally, we're going to cover some example scenarios because if you're like me, you learn best by correlating the information you learn in something like a webinar with real life situations, right? So being able to make that correlation with where it applies in the real world is very helpful when you're learning something new. So we're going to be covering a number of different example scenarios. After that, we're going to do just a real brief overview of Altera VM Backup, and then we'll get to our Q&A. Now, a quick thing on the Q&A. We're probably going to have a lot of questions, as licensing always generates a lot of questions, right? So what you can do is throughout the webinar, you can feel free to use the questions form inside of GoToWebinar here and ask your question, and we'll get to it at the end of the webinar during the Q&A section, and we'll answer as many questions as we can, time permitting. So what we usually do for those questions that we don't get time to answer, we always put them in a follow-up post out on the Altera Hyper-V blog, and you'll see the URL to that later today. We always put them in a post on the Hyper-V blog along with the recording of the webinar so that you can still get the answer to your question. We want to make sure we get your questions answered and get you the information you need. And then after that, we'll wrap things up and let you get back to your day. So we'll move on to the introductions now. And again, my name is Andy Serwich. I am a technical evangelist with Altera Software. And I'm also a Microsoft Cloud and Data Center MVP with a focus on Hyper-V. So I've been in the industry for quite a while now. I've always had a big focus on pretty much all things infrastructure, virtualization, VMware, Hyper-V, storage, networking, anything to do with the infrastructure really has always kind of been what I've worked on. And when it comes to licensing always kind of enters into that discussion, right? So I'm no stranger to the ways of Microsoft licensing. I blog quite regularly on our two Altera blogs. We've got a Hyper-V blog and we've got a VMware blog. And if you're interested in connecting on Twitter, my Twitter handle is there as well. So I'll pass it over to you, Thomas, so you can do your own introduction.
Perfect. Thank you, Andy. So my name is Thomas Maurer. As Andy, I'm a Microsoft MVP for Cloud and Data Center Management. My focus at the beginning especially was Hyper-V, but since then it moved quite a while to the Microsoft technologies or Microsoft Cloud technologies in different parts. So I work as a cloud architect for a company called IDNetX, which is a consulting and engineering company located in Switzerland, focusing on Microsoft Cloud technology. So I'm working there as basically for architecting solutions for data centers or public cloud or hybrid cloud scenarios, as well as some workplace scenarios. And I was focusing a lot in the past years on Hyper-V and on fabric management, and also hit some, of course, a lot of licensing questions here as well. Probably some of you know my blog and also follow me on Twitter. But yeah, let's get on.
Sounds good. One other thing I want to talk about real quick is about the sponsor. Again, I work for Altera Software, and we're a fast-growing developer, some really fantastic, easy-to-use backup software. The backup software operates at the virtualization layer and protects Hyper-V and VMware-based workloads. Our virtual backup application is trusted by 30,000 SMBs, and it's our flagship product, and it's called Altero VM Backup. If you're interested in a little bit more information about that product, you can go to altero.com/vm-backup. So with that said, I'm going to pass it over to Thomas now for the bulk of today's talk, and hope you guys enjoy.
Perfect. Thanks, Andy. So let's get started. And first, one important part here. So there's a little disclaimer here. When we talk about licensing, it can be very sort of kind of thinking about legal stuff here. And we are not lawyers, and we are not doing legal advice here. We are just focusing and trying to bring you some information how licensing works, right? And so you got an idea what has changed in Windows Server 2016, how do I license that, and probably also show you some possibilities you didn't know before. But if you want it done it right, or you want to make sure that you're licensed correctly, please contact Microsoft or ULR to connect and get some real stuff going on and get some of the information. They will check and they will help you to get licensed the right way. If you want to make sure a little bit more, please use the product use rights document from Microsoft. In there you can find information how licensing is handled, or how you can license products and services, what you can do with it and everything. So this is basically the legal document you have to look for. So if you're a clever person and you understand kind of the legal things, this document is probably for you. And then there is also Windows Server 2016, an official licensing data sheet from Microsoft, which kind of like tries to help a little bit and gets you some information about that. But since this is sometimes very complex things, we at Altero, Eric wrote a great licensing ebook. You probably will see that. You will get the link to that as well. And we're trying to really show you what has changed in this presentation, but then you can also download the Altero white paper on that. So let's get started. And this here is not, this webinar is focusing on how do I license Windows Server running in virtual environments. That doesn't really mean Hyper-V only or something. So basically how Windows Server licensing works, it doesn't really matter on which platform or hypervisor you're running on. If it's Hyper-V, if it's VMware, that's basically the same thing for the licensing of the virtual Windows Server guests. So it doesn't really change if it's KVM or something. But still, since there's a lot of things you have to know about Windows Server Hyper-V, and there is some parts probably interesting for you if you're also using, for example, right now VMware, I'm going to show you a little bit about the history of Hyper-V here. So Microsoft in the early days bought a company called Connectix. They were making products like Virtual PC and Virtual Server. And then in Windows, in 2008, Microsoft introduced the first version of Hyper-V in Windows Server 2008, which then a little bit later on they released another product called Hyper-V Server 2008. So a lot of people still don't know what's the difference here, or what Hyper-V Server 2008 really is. So Hyper-V is a role in Windows Server, and you can install Windows Server and then activate Hyper-V. But a lot of people don't know that there is a free version of Hyper-V out there, and it's called Hyper-V Server. You can go and download that. You could do that with 2012 and 2012 R2, and now with Windows Server 2016 you can also download Hyper-V Server 2016. This is basically a core version of Windows Server, and it only includes Hyper-V related features, right? So you can't really use it as a domain controller. You can join it to a domain, but you can't use it as a domain controller. You can activate the Hyper-V role, you can activate the clustering feature, you get all the live migration features and so on for the Hyper-V environment. And that's pretty cool. So if you're running, for example, only Linux virtual machines, and you want to get a great hypervisor with clustering support, failovering support, and so on, you can just go download Hyper-V Server 2016. You will get support. It's free, and you don't have to pay any licenses at all. If you're running Windows Server on top of it, of course you have to licensing it as well. So then Microsoft really speeded up the game a little bit with Windows Server 2008 R2. They introduced clustering and things like that, and it was basically the first serious version, to be honest, of Hyper-V. And then they updated it with Service Pack 1, included features specially designed for VDI scenarios, including features like dynamic memory, which allows you to dynamically, or allows the virtual machine to automatically claim memory or release memory if they don't need it anymore. And then also remote FX, which is great for graphics performance in VDI environments. And then one of the bigger releases here is Windows Server 2012. I mean, Microsoft really changed the game a little bit in that case when they released Windows Server 2012. They introduced some cool new features, some software-defined data center features, and I think that was basically the first time they brought features back from Microsoft Azure to the hypervisor itself. So I have your list, for example. I don't want to talk about features here. It's about licensing, but here a quick list of features introduced in 2012 and 2012 R2 Hyper-V. And if you compare that with Hyper-V in 2016, you can see they almost have the same amount of features in one release now as they had before in 2 releases, right? So this is pretty awesome. They included some great new features like shielded VMs, which allows you to protect VMs from administrators or from, and also allows you to encrypt virtual machines, as well as features nested virtualization and stuff. So great new features. You can read more on that on my blog and also on the Antero blog as well. So, but let me a little bit talk about, for example, scale. So Microsoft also bumped the scale numbers a little bit. So they moved that right now with Windows Server 2016. You can have up to 512 cores, physical cores in the Hyper-V host, up to 24 terabytes of memory in the physical host, and you can create virtual machines with 240 cores and 16 terabytes of memory. So that's quite a large number, and these numbers are basically true for every version of Hyper-V, right? So even if you're running the free version of Hyper-V 2016, you will get those numbers. There is no limitation on that except for the hardware. So these numbers are not theoretical numbers. These numbers are real tested numbers. So Microsoft somewhere had this hardware and they could test if Hyper-V really could match those numbers and if that works. If someone out of you has hardware like this, please drop me an email. I want really I want to test it as well because get some great screenshot out of that. Okay, so let's go for the SKUs, and this is very interesting. I removed basically the Windows Server 2008 R2 list here or slide because in Windows Server 2008 and 2008 R2 things were a little bit different, right? You had multiple SKUs available. For example, you had a web server edition, you had an enterprise version, and so on. And with 2012 and 2012 R2, Microsoft a little bit merged that, right? So you have a data standard and a data center edition in Windows Server, and you also had the free Hyper-V server, or you still have that one. And they if you look at it on the Hyper-V features, you can see that they basically were the same. So the only difference here between those versions were most of the time was, well, it was virtual machine use rights. So with standard, you had automatically license for 2 virtual machines, Windows Server virtual machines. With data center, you could create unlimited Windows Server virtual machines on one server, and then for Hyper-V server you didn't get any Windows Server license at all. So that's great if you run Linux virtual machines, for example. You don't have to pay anything. If you're running VDI and you have to license Windows 10 or Windows 8 or Windows 7 virtual machines, this was great too, because that's totally different virtual licenses, right? So you don't have to pay for Windows Server licenses you don't need. So basically you could say Hyper-V is basically free. The only thing you have to license are the virtual machines on top of it, and that's doesn't really matter if you're running Hyper-V or VMware. And then one of the big changes here, or one of the big things here also was you had the option to install full server or server core in standard data center. Hyper-V server just came with one edition and was server core, right? So that's one thing I have to mention here. With 2016, things in that case didn't really change, right? So I will talk a bit about the changes a little bit later, and there are some changes, but if you look at the SKUs available, you have still the data center and the standard and the Hyper-V server SKU. They all support 24 terabytes of memory, 512 cores. They support failover clustering, Hyper-V, and so on. So there's not a real difference in terms of scale, if you think about that. And again, for the virtual machine image use rights, you can, with standard, you can create, if you license the host, you can create 2 virtual machines. With data center, you get unlimited virtual machines. And again, with Hyper-V server, you can just use it for example, for Linux virtual machines or so on. Something which has changed, you now have not only full server or server with desktop experience, you also have, and server core, you also have now nano server support. So nano server is going to be a little bit special, and I will cover that a little bit later. But that's also an option how you can install your Hyper-V server as well, or VMs running on that Hyper-V server. So before we start with Windows Server 2016 licensing, there are some fundamentals and some basics here on Windows Server licensing. And it turns out that a lot of people don't know about that, so that's why we cover them a little bit here and give you some more information. One of the things is that the licensing transfer. So if you get a Windows Server license, you assign that basically to a physical box, right? That's always the case. It's always assigned to a physical box. You can, though, move the license to another physical box. So, for example, after 90 days, you can move it to another physical box or other hardware as well and get this server licensed. That's what you can do. This doesn't count, for, of course, for OEM license. They are cheaper, of course, but you can't really move that to different hardware. You'll get the license for exactly the hardware you bought it with. And then if you buy a new server, you cannot move that around. Something else I have to mention as well. So if there would be like host failures or something, for example, a host dies and you can't really bring it back, this is not a rule Microsoft lets you like in the rain. They will allow you to move that to the new host if, for example, something like that happens. But it's not the plan that you move VM like licenses around your hosts all the time. So that's why they say, okay, you can do that every 90 days. For other products, by the way, like SQL Server or like Exchange or something, different rules really apply. So you have to check what you have to do when you license the other products as well. So that's something I have to mention here. Another thing is that I mentioned that with Windows Server Standard, you basically get the rights for 2 virtual instances of Windows Server running on top of that physical box, right? With Data Center Edition, you can basically have unlimited virtual instances on that physical box. And well, there's not that after 2 VMs, you don't have really to switch to data center. So you can still use standard, and you can buy, for example, another standard edition, and then you can basically create 4 virtual machines on top of that. That's called license stacking. So you can add like standard licenses to your physical server. So in terms of that, in terms of like when does that make sense? This makes sense. I think the sweet spot, it really depends a little bit in which region you're living and what are your special prices are and conditions. But it's around 7 to 10 virtual machines, I guess, where there will be the difference, where it makes sense to buy Data Center Edition instead of Standard. Again, though, you can still use the stacking also here. Remember the 90-day rule. And then one important note here, it's for clustering, right? So this is a big mistake a lot of people make. They buy licenses and they think, okay, we add them all together. So with standard, for example, they think with a standard license, I get 2 virtual machines. So if I have a cluster of 2 physical hosts, I buy 2 standard licenses, that makes it a total of 4 virtual machines, right? But that's not like how it works. You have to license all the virtual machine which can run on the physical hardware. So for example, in a clustered environment where you run 4 virtual machines and you have 2 Hyper-V nodes, you have to license 4 virtual machines on every node, right? So that's very important here to understand that every physical box has to have the full amount of virtual machines if you run inside a cluster. Because you can, like, it can run there, the physical host can basically fail and you can run all the virtual machines on that host. So this is very important to mention, and if you do some calculations, right? Okay, and then there are some other considerations. So first of all, if you do your licensing using volume licenses, you get the downgrade and down addition rights. So that means that if you're running, for example, if you buy Windows Server 2016, you're still allowed to run some virtual machines if you want to with 2012 R2. For example, if some applications do not support Windows Server 2016 and so on, you can still downgrade to an older version if you're using volume licensing. Another very important fact, especially for small environments, is that you get those 2 virtual, with standard you get those 2 virtual machines licensed, right? So you can basically have 2 virtual machines if you're using the host only for Hyper-V, right? But if you're using the physical host, for example, you install the Hyper-V role and you also created the Active Directory domain controller on that host, it will count as a virtual machine. So you'll only have the right to do another virtual machine on it. So I wouldn't really, on a technically recommend it to have a Hyper-V host which is also a domain controller or a DNS server or whatsoever. A Hyper-V server, in my opinion, should just be a Hyper-V server, right? There shouldn't be other roles and features on it. You should just use it as a virtualization host. But you could do that, and in that case, one of your licenses is counting as a virtual machine there. So just to remember that if you're planning to buy a standard licenses for 2 virtual machine, one, for example, is doing Active Directory, the other one is doing some other stuff, and then you think that you can install like the DHCP server, for example, on the Hyper-V host itself, that's not how it works, right? So that's just to remember. For desktop operating systems, things are a little bit different. So if you don't have Windows Server licenses, they have a special license for Windows Client operating system if it's Windows 8 or Windows 10. Another great features I'm going to quickly cover, and a lot of people don't know about it, is the automated virtual machine activation. And this is very, very useful if you are a service provider or you're running in a cloud where your virtual machines don't have necessary internet access or access from the network to, for example, some KMS servers or something like that. So in that case, the virtual machine probably would never get activated, right? And that's an issue. But Microsoft solved that issue with the automated virtual machine activation, and I will tell you a little bit more about that. For Hyper-V Replica, there is the case that you have to license the original machine, so the source virtual machine, but also you have to make sure that you have also licensed the virtual machine on the replica host. So let me quickly talk about the activation of Windows Server 2012 or 2016 VMs using automated virtual machine activation. So again, what this feature is designed for is if you're running a VM inside a network which has no internet connection at all or no network connectivity to a KMS server or something which can activate the VM, then your virtual machine never really gets activated, right? So that's an issue, and that's especially if you're a service provider. You want to make sure that your tenants or your customers can activate the virtual machines even if they are not joining the internet. So what it basically does is automated virtual machine activation checks if the host is activated. So if the physical Hyper-V host is activated running Windows Server 2012 R2 or 2016 Data Center Edition, then you can use that feature. So what you basically do, you create a virtual machine running 2012 R2 or 2016, standard, data center, whatsoever, and you inject that special key. You can see that key on the Microsoft website. And if the physical host is activated, the virtual machine will start up, check for the activation status, and it will automatically activate the virtual machine as well. So it will stay activated until the next reboot, and then it will check again if the host is still activated, or it will check after 7 days if the license is still valid for that host. So very cool feature, very simple, not a lot of implementation, just use the right key to activate the virtual machines and you're basically done. Okay, so we're coming now to the main part and talking about the changes of licensing in Windows Server 2016. There are quite a lot. It's not like the changes from 2012 to 2012 R2, which are basically none, more or less. It's really, there are really some big changes in there. And one of the biggest one is that you still have a data center SKU and a standard SKU. But in 2012 R2, both SKUs had the same features, right? Except for one, the automated virtual machine activation did only work on a Hyper-V host running data center. That was probably the only real feature which was different. So you had the same live migration stuff, you had the same Active Directory stuff, you had basically all the same features and roles available in both SKUs, right? But that has changed. So with 2016, in both editions you have the normal server, basic server functions, you can use Active Directory and things like that, you can run Hyper-V with fully clustered and everything. But some of the new software-defined data center solutions, for example, Storage Spaces Direct or Storage Replica, which by the way is a really cool feature, or the new Shielded Virtual Machine feature, or the new networking stack for software-defined networking. Those are only parts you really get when you're running Data Center Edition, right? So this time, if you deploy a Windows Server 2016, you have to make sure that you deploy the right SKU, right? Otherwise, you will not be able to use Storage Replica or Storage Spaces and so on. So that's one of the big differences here. By the way, in both scenarios, you can use like Windows Server containers, and of course you can also use both with Nano Server. But Nano Server has some other changes as well. I will come to that a little bit later. So the other big change, and this is the biggest one I think, is they are switching from a socket-based or from a processor-based licensing model to a core-based licensing model. And how this works is that you have at least you have those 2 core packs for your server, and you have the smallest amount you have to license are 2 sockets with 8 cores each, right? So for example, you buy a server 8 cores on each, with 2 sockets, 8 physical cores on each processor. Then you buy like 8 2-core packs, makes it a total of 16 cores per server. That's the smallest one, and in that case, the licensing costs should be basically the same as they were in 2012 R2 for a normal license, for the normal licensing. Now, if you have a server with more CPUs than 8, so for example, you get like 2 times 10 cores, then in that case you have to buy additional 2-core packs for that, and that will require additional licensing, right? So this is basically how it works, and we'll talk a little bit in some examples about that. So again, this is a little summary of that. So you have to license the physical cores on the server. The question always comes up, like, is hyperthreading included into that? So if your CPU supports hyperthreading, for the licensing, that doesn't really matter. If it's an 8-core CPU and with hyperthreading you get 16 cores, that doesn't really matter. It's still an 8-core CPU. You have to license a minimum of 8 cores per processor, and you have to license a minimum of 16 cores per server. So you have to license at least 16 cores for a physical server. So that's the case here. And then again, if you can buy additional packs, you have to buy 2 core packs in that case. So in terms of pricing, you can think of that since you need to buy 8 2 core packs, 1 core pack is basically 1/8 of the full server in 2012 R2. It was like it was before, right? And then another big change, which is probably not only in licensing, but it's a bit about servicing, and it has some impacts on licensing as well. So in Windows Server 2012 and 2012 R2, we had a long-term servicing branch, right? Like you couldn't really choose; it was always like this, and we still have that in Windows Server 2016 for server with desktop experience, meaning full server, or server core. So you get those 5 + 5 years of servicing and support, and then you get security and quality fixes, but you don't get any new features. So you basically have to wait until the next release of Windows Server, right? So that's one thing. But Windows Server 2016 has also a Nano Server option. And Nano Server is a little bit different here. So Nano Server is not in the long-term servicing branch, it's in the current branch for business. And probably if you know a little bit about Windows 10, you know that there also something exists with the name current branch of business. So here is that Nano Server will not be supported as a in the long-term servicing branch. It will only be supported in the CBB. And Microsoft will this has some impact. So you have to upgrade, right, to newer versions. But you also get new features earlier than you would get when you're in the long-term servicing branch, right? So Microsoft will upgrade Nano Server, and I will show you that a little bit in a better graphic in a second. But to mention here, this has also an impact on licensing. So if you're losing Nano Server, you also need software assurance, or SA, to be licensed correctly to use that change. So again, this shows it a little bit. So Windows Server 2012 and 2012 R2 were always in that long-term servicing branch. Then if you're running server with desktop experience or server core, you're basically also in this long-term servicing branch. If you choose to run Nano Server, you would run right now in CBB1. And Microsoft will now offer new CBB1s earlier than the next server release. So you will get new CBBs, you will get new functionality and things like that with those releases. And something also to mention, so you're moving in that scenario and you will get new features, but the downside on that, or the impact on that, is that you have to move forward, right? So if CBB4 will be available, you basically have to move to CBB2 or CBB3 or CBB4. You're not supported then to run CBB1 for the long term, right? So you have to switch to that current branch of business. Yeah, current branch of business. Okay, so that's some important changes. We will go through a couple of scenarios here. Again, this is a short overview. I will not go through to each of those points now, but remember that it's really special that we have to license the cores and then get licenses for the virtual editions and get licenses for the standard or data center edition. One thing though, if you license standard server, you get 2 virtual instances. If you license data center, things get a lot easier. Of course, they cost a little bit more, but you get more features, things get easier, you can deploy more virtual machines as well. So in a highly virtualized world with a lot of virtual machines, data center is probably the way to go. If you're in a smaller world with not a lot of servers and things like that, or if you're in a branch office scenario where you don't run a lot of physical servers and you don't need those software-defined data center features, then Windows Server Standard can be a great option for you for your licenses. So how do I calculate what I really need? So we have those those calculation here, which really helps you to calculate. So I said that both editions come in like 2 core packs. So I'm always talking about using 2 cores, right, in one license piece. So what you do with standard is you take the number of physical cores, divide it by 2 and round it up. So you get a number. For example, if you have 8-core virtual CPU, you get 4 in that case, and then you multiply it with the virtual instances you're running on that. If that's 2 and divided by, you get, for example, 1, so you would have 4 licenses needed, but since you have to buy at least 8, so that's the minimum here. If the number goes bigger, then you probably will buy a little bit more than 8, but you always have to buy 8 2-core packs, right? That's the absolute minimum per physical host. Things get a little bit easier if you're thinking about data center edition, since there you don't really care about how many virtual machines you're running on or virtual instances of Windows Server. Things are changing. So what you only do is you take the physical core, physical numbers of cores the server has, and then you get the numbers of licenses or 2-core packs you have to buy. So that's the difference here. So if you buy, for example, an 8-core CPU or 2 8-core CPUs in a server, you buy at least 8 of those license packs, so you license 16 cores. If you have a larger number, for example, you buy a server with 2 processors and each 16 cores, you buy 16 of those 2-core pack licenses, right? Which basically would mean more or less doubling the costs here. Okay, so let's go for the first example here. And we are running here a Windows Server 2016 standard host with 2 physical CPUs with 4 cores each, and we're running 2 virtual machines with Windows Server 2016 standard on it. So this means we have a total of 8 physical cores. We actually would need to license like only 8 cores, which would mean 4 Windows Server 2016 standard licenses. Since the minimum is 8, we still have to license 8 of those packages, right? So we have smaller CPUs, but still we have to license at least 8 cores per CPU. So that would mean we have to buy 8 of those packages. So let's go a little bit further. Now, when you think about it, I told you that you have 2 licenses for Windows Server guests in that case, and now we're running a 3rd Windows Server on that. Since we don't have more physical cores, we're kind of like, I would say over licensed, but we have licenses left, right? So in that case, we still have 8 Windows Server 2016 Standard Edition 2-pack licenses, but we can create another 2 virtual machines on that, or for example, just 1 virtual machine on that. So in our next example, we are basically running on a node with more cores. So again, Windows Server Standard, we're using standard here for the virtual machines as well for the physical node, and we have 2 sockets with each 6 cores, which makes it a total of 12 cores, and we would need, just for the cores, we would need 8 Windows Server 2016 standard licenses. Still, that would be enough even if it would be an 2 8-core processors. But since we have to add like the 3rd one, we will, since this is another virtual machine running on that, we don't have this license overdose, if you will. So we have to buy additional Windows Server licenses here. So you get 12 Windows Server Standard Edition licenses, 2-core packs licenses you need. Then in a cluster scenario, this is basically the same scenario we had before, but this time we're running on 2 physical servers, running 30 virtual machines on that cluster. So probably 2 virtual machines on one node and the other one on the other node, but that doesn't really matter. So because one node can in theory run all 3 virtual machines, we have to license both physical boxes, which makes it 24 Windows Server 2016 standard licenses. And then my next example is basically running Windows Server 2016 data center with like 50, in that case 50 Windows Server 2016 data center servers. So you have a normal a server with 8 core with 2 CPUs, 8 cores, makes it a total of 16 cores. So of course we have to license 8 2-core packs of Windows Server 2016 Data Center Edition. And it doesn't really matter. I could run one virtual machine, I could run 100 virtual machines on that hardware. That would be what I have to license. Now, as I said, if I have larger CPUs with more cores, the licensing goes up. So in that case, we have to buy 10 2-core packs of Windows Server 2016 Data Center Edition instead of the 8 we had to buy before. 8 was the total minimum, and 10 is now because we have larger CPUs. It still doesn't matter how many virtual machines we run on top of that. The example 7 I want to show you is that we have now a physical box running 12 cores each per virtual machine, but we are running Linux as a guest. So we are not running any Windows Server virtual machine on that host, for example. So what would be the ideal solution is you run Hyper-V Server 2016. So this is the free version. You get all those features you get basically in standard and data center, except for like the software-defined part. But you don't pay any licenses at all because you're only licensing the Windows Server license in the guests, right? So that would be no licensing cost at all. This makes it great. This also works if you run, for example, client operating systems like Windows 10 and so on. You don't need any Windows Server license at all in those scenarios. So for some customers, for example, instead of building one big cluster where they run a mixed workloads of Windows Server or Linux virtual machines, you're probably better off sometimes building 2 clusters. One where you license all your Windows Server virtual machines, and another cluster where you run the free Hyper-V server and you build your Linux servers on. So that is something you keep in mind to save licensing costs. That can help to do that. And then if you're really interested right now to switch to Hyper-V 2016 from VMware, Microsoft makes it really interesting for you, since you're paying now, if you're running VMware, you're paying basically the VMware licenses, and you also pay, of course, the Windows Server virtualization licenses. But if you're switching to VMware, to Hyper-V, you not only can now erase the costs for the VMware licenses, Microsoft will also give you the Windows Server Data Center license for free, and the only thing you really have to buy is software assurance. If you're really interested in that, you have to contact with your Microsoft account manager. I put a link in here. You will get the presentation. You can also have a look at that. There are additional information how you can apply, but basically just contact your account manager. It's important. It's only until mid of next year where you can do that. Well, use that offering. Good. So quick summary here. Again, we have standard and data center edition. Keep in mind, not both editions do offer the same features and roles. On both editions you can run core, full server or server desktop experience as it called today, and then you can also use it as nano server. There is still a free version of Hyper-V, so Hyper-V Server 2016 is free. You can download that, you can run that, you can run free Linux virtual machines, or if there is kind of like Linux virtual machines you have to license, you can also use it and just license the Linux virtual machines, but not paying for Windows Server licenses. The automated virtual machine activation feature is pretty cool, very easy to implement. It's probably something you want to have a look at. We changed now to a core-based licensing model, so you have to mention that probably there are some decisions where it makes sense to probably buy a physical CPU with less cores, but probably with more power, with higher speed cores or something like that. Then if you run nano server, make sure you have software assurance. There is nothing preventing you from just creating a nano server or something like that and use it. but to be licensed correctly, you have to have software assurance. And then Microsoft has also the container feature, which you get Windows Server containers, and you will also get Hyper-V containers. Windows Server containers you basically can create on the fly on all your machines, and you don't have to license anything. If you're running Hyper-V containers, you basically license them as virtual machines, right? So, for example, if you use standard, you could create basically 2 Hyper-V containers on that host. If you're using data center, you could create unlimited Hyper-V containers. So that was basically it from my side. I'm switching here back to Andy, and he will tell you a little bit more about Altaro VM Backup for some minutes.
All right, sounds good. Hey, thanks, Thomas. That's a bunch of great information, and hopefully puts some minds at ease about the changes in licensing with Windows Server 2016, as there were quite a few changes, as folks have seen during the presentation. So real quick, we're going to be getting to the Q&A here in a second, but real quick, I wanted to take a little time and talk about Altaro's flagship product, Altaro VM Backup. So again, as I mentioned earlier, the backup application is trusted by 30,000 SMBs and 4,600 IT resellers and MSPs worldwide. And we really focus on 3 main things here at Altaro in regards to our application, and it's got to be easy to use and deploy. I mean, that's really a big thing. Ease of use is a big focus, and because we understand that, especially in the SMB space, you might have people in accounting running backups, right? So we want to make sure that it's easy to use, but powerful and contains all the features that people expect inside of a backup application. That kind of leads into the next point, highly capable. All the tools needed for a solid backup strategy at an honest price. And I'd like to spend a little time talking about the last bullet point here, our outstanding support. I'm really proud of our support team. The folks on our support team do a fantastic job. We've got some best-of-breed support in the industry. And when you call for a support ticket with us, you're going to get a product expert as soon as someone picks up the phone. You're not going to go through this whole tier 1, tier 2, have you tried turning it off and turning it on back, that type of thing. You're not going to get that type of thing with support. So the person you talk to is going to be the person that owns your issue from A to B. So again, fantastic support. Really proud of those guys. So next slide, please. And again, I want to mention that, again, the flagship product is Altaro VM Backup. You can see our dashboard there. Again, we really focus on a nice, clean, easy-to-use UI. If you're interested in more information on that product, you can go to altaro.com/vm-backup, or you can download a fully featured 30-day trial at altaro.com/download. And after that 30 days, you can choose to run a free instance of it for 2 VMs forever. So kind of nice for home labs and things like that. Another thing that we've got is we also have a partner program. So if you're an IT reseller and you're interested, we have some varying levels, bronze, silver, and gold. It's free to sign up and there's no commitment. If you're interested in more information on that, you can go to altaro.com/partners, or you can just send an email to sales@altaro.com as well for more information. So what we'll do now is we'll get over into the Q&A. And as I mentioned earlier, there is always a lot of questions that come up as part of a licensing discussion. So we've got a little bit of time for some questions here. We're going to cover the ones that we can in the time allotted. And again, any questions that we don't get to, we will post them and the answers along with a webinar recording out on our Altaro blog here in the next week or so. So let me get the questions out here, and there's a lot of good ones here, it looks like. So first off, the first question here, and you talked to this a little bit, Thomas, was for standard edition virtual image use rights, is the host system restricted to just hosting the VMs, or can you install additional roles on the host like AD, DNS, and still use both VMs? That seems to be a pretty common question. I think you talked to that. I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, so there are 2 things to it. So basically, yes, you could basically use the host and install roles and features. There's nothing really restricting you to do so. But there are two things. One is the technical side. So I wouldn't really recommend running any other role on a Hyper-V host itself. I would create a virtual machine for that and run it in there. And the second one is you can do that, but what you will lose, so if you have a standard edition and you get 2 licenses for running operating systems, you can use that in the virtual machine, or you could use one for the physical host and install another role, and then you have only one virtual machine license left, right? So basically the host in that case would count as a virtual machine license. So my recommendation, really don't do it from a technical perspective. There could be some reasons you probably want to do that if you have a very small host and so on, but make sure that you have enough licenses, of course, and also think about the technical stuff, the impact you probably have on your Hyper-V host.
Yeah, I think that's the real piece of wisdom there is I mean, if you have the 2 licenses, you know, the 2 VMs that you can use as part of the standard license, why not move that role into one of those VMs, you know? It's likely better suited there than it is on the host itself for a number of reasons. I think the most common reason that I've run into is some piece of software or role is installed on the host and it requires patching, and you know, certain pieces of software require reboots for the update to take effect. Not all of them, but some. And now you have to reboot your host, and if you only have a single host, now you have to take down your whole environment to accommodate that. So again, like you said, kind of think about the technical aspects of that. Next question we have here centers around Hyper-V server. So the question is, can you have network shares or drive partitions on the host, say for pass-through drives? And my personal favorite thing about Hyper-V server is that it maintains pretty much near feature parity with, you know, the other versions of Windows Server. I don't know if you have any comments on that, Thomas. I mean, I don't see any reason why that wouldn't work.
Yep, I totally agree with you here. That would work, I guess, and it is even, I mean, it's still Windows, right? It's not something really different. It's just that they removed all the roles and features. So you still will have file shares to copy something on that server and copy it from that server. But for example, what you don't get if you think about running a real file server on it, so the file server resource manager, I think it's called, or something, a feature like this, that's obviously not on that host available. But of course, it's still Windows. You can still create shares and copy things to it and copy things from it. Absolutely.
Yep. Another question here centers around, so the host Windows Server license, so you know, for the physical OSE, covers the guest licenses as well. Can you talk about that relationship a little bit? Just add a little bit of clarification there.
Okay, so what you basically do, well, the host, if you're using the host server as a Hyper-V server, you basically do not license the host itself. It kind of sounds like crazy now what I'm saying, but you don't license the host itself. You license the virtual machine you're running on that host, right? On the other hand, you're licensing the physical cores on that host, right? So it's kind of a mix between them. But it's not like if you're going, for example, like in a VMware scenario where you buy like licenses for the physical hosts or something like that. When you run VMware, you basically pay for the hypervisor itself, and then you pay also the Windows Server licenses as you would use in Hyper-V. Not saying something about VMware here. It's just probably it explains it a little bit that there is no real licensing cost on the hypervisor itself. It's really the Windows servers you run in the environments. I hope that clarifies it a little bit.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Another question here is, where can people go if they need more specific licensing information for their particular environment? Let's say they want to certify, you know, in writing, you know, I've verified that these are the licenses I need for my environment, and Microsoft says, "Yep, that looks good." I mean, where do they go for that type of information?
Yeah. So So if you're a larger company, you have probably a partner company or a LAR, as they would call it, which basically sells you the licensing and everything. And they also do licensing consulting, and they tell you what licensing you need, right? And they also do things like that. If you don't know who that is, or for example, if you don't have one, I would recommend that you connect to your Microsoft salesperson, your technical account manager, or your account manager itself, and he will tell you where to go to, right? So it's always recommended that if you do something really special, or if you think you do something special, or you just don't know how to do it, and you want to make sure it's done right and you did the best job to be licensed correctly, then you have to connect to some of the LARs. They will help you there. I can talk like I could here is in Europe. Even if you go to Microsoft, they will recommend that you go to a LAR, and they are not doing that by themselves, right? Because it's a legal matter, and LARs are really trained for that, and they know what they're doing. And if you are not kind of a legal person, then it can become legal advice, and that could be not that healthy for you if you're doing it wrong. So yeah, connect with your LARs if you want to make sure. We try to help you here with that webinar to get a little bit of understanding, and also check out the ebook. It gives you an understanding how things are done. It's really helpful to get things started. And as you mentioned, Andy, it's not only like a scenario. This is how it's done. It also says why it's done that way, and that helps you to make decisions, right?
Yep. Perfect, thank you. I think we've got time for about 2, maybe 3 more questions here. So this is a quick one here, and I think we talked about it briefly earlier. Do hyper-threaded cores affect the core-based licensing? And as we mentioned earlier, you know, a core is a core. Physical core is a core. Hyper-threading really doesn't come into play there. You know, if you have 8 cores in the CPU, you've got 8 cores. You don't have to worry about those hyper-threaded cores. Another question here, does Server 2016 downgrade rights apply to the Hyper-V host itself? So for example, if they have a 2016 license, could they install 2012 R2? And from my experience, that applies to the host as well. I mean, really, that's any Windows operating system as long as you have the downgrade rights, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what I was thinking. I mean, there would be no reason to not allow that to happen.
Yep. Okay, well, I think that's about all the time we have for questions here. Again, I want to mention real quick that if your question didn't get answered during our Q&A time here, we're going to be putting a post on the Altera blog, again, with the video, the slide deck, and a list of all these questions that weren't answered with some detailed responses. So keep an eye out for that on the Altera blog. That's www.altera.com/hyper-v. Again, I want to say thanks to everyone for attending today. Hope this was helpful to you. I want to say thanks to you, Thomas, for taking the time to kind of show us the ropes and teach us all the new stuff in 2016 licensing. So thank you for that. And with that, I'll let everyone get back to their day. And again, thanks for attending, and have a good one. Thanks for watching.
Thanks. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.